Hey everyone, welcome to Max and Nick's top picks for week 4. So we're going to do something a little fun for this top picks video. We're going to actually use DraftKings' new pick'em format to just go over, who our top picks are. This is only going to be the early slate, but I thought it would be a fun format. And we can also go over a little pick'em strategy as well. So first things first is, one thing that I really like to do in pick'em that I think is an overlooked strategy is a lot of people like to just pick their quarterbacks first and then go from there. And I think that's a really restrictive and kind of not very smart way of doing things, because what I want to do is figure out which are the players that we want to use and are going to be the good ownership plays, and then just stack the quarterbacks with them and not go vice versa, because otherwise I think we're going to end up a little too chalky. So we're going to go backwards first. We're not going to start with the first tier. We're going to start with tier number 8. So tier number 8, this is sort of a middle of the pack tier. Nick, who are your picks in this tier?
Yeah, for this group, I would actually say one guy who I don't think will be owned that highly and who actually has better upside probably than people may think at first is Delanie Walker. And the reason why I'm saying that is I think a lot of times the public players, they'll, like, when they play tournaments, yes, they want upside, of course, but they'll also sometimes think, like, when they think of tight ends, unless it's Gronk, like, tight ends really don't have that much upside. I disagree with that. I think tight ends, just generally speaking, have as much upside most of the time than the wide receivers or running backs and everything like that. So with Tennessee, though, there's no Corey Davis this week again. Eric Decker still, whether it's recovering still from his injury last year or just hasn't gelled in the Tennessee offense, still doesn't quite look like the Eric Decker we know. And so in any case, I think Delanie Walker here is actually a nice potential low ownership here in tier 8 and is a good spot here.
Yeah, and I think probably most people will go with Delanie Walker's teammate, Rashard Matthews, and so that might depress his ownership a little bit. I have a couple guys that I like. One is Allen Hurns. And just really quickly, if I listen to this podcast that's run by a PFF guy, his name's Jeff Ratcliffe, and he does a lot of work with shadow coverage. The Jets have their number one corner, Morris Claiborne, who, is not known as a great corner, has been really exceptional this year and is a former number one pick. He's probably going to be shadowing Marquise Lee. Allen Hurns has performed well this year, so I do like him in this matchup. But I think the sleeper for this tier is Mike Gillislee, who I think will probably be overlooked. He really hasn't had a great game since week 1, but I think there is a chance that New England could run a lot in this game. He does have the upside for a 100-yard bonus. He could get multiple touchdowns like we saw in week 1. I think he probably is going to be overlooked in this tier, and I like him quite a bit.
Yeah, completely agree there, especially with with Gillislee. There's no doubt about it. I would say my two top options were Gillislee and Delanie Walker, and I still no complaints, of course, about either of your guys. So
okay, so we're going to put Delanie Walker in there, and we'll probably just switch off picks. Tier 7, I'll just leave this one off. I'm looking at this tier, and we see another middling tier, and I see a few guys that I think people will like. Sammy Watkins, for one, had a big game last week. Chris Hogan, I think, will also be chalky. I think one thing just to consider here is I don't think anyone will use Danny Amendola in this tier. I don't think he's a bad play. He obviously has not been playing a lot of snaps, but is a guy who, we saw in week 1, had 100 yards on 7 catches. He's a guy who can pile up the catches, could get a touchdown, and none of the people in this tier really are could have like medium games. So I think he's an interesting play from a tournament standpoint. My favorite play, though, and someone who I don't think will get a ton of ownership, is Golden Tate. He's the best receiver on Detroit. Minnesota, also another team that plays shadow coverage. Xavier Rhodes going to be on Marvin Jones. Detroit is going to pass it a lot. I think Tate is probably actually just straight up the best player in this tier.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I'll just throw in, because Golden Tate would definitely be my favorite. Minnesota actually this year, 26th in yards per pass attempt allowed. Their pass defense actually hasn't been that great this year. Against the run, they've been very solid so far, but not against the pass. And, of course, Golden Tate, I mentioned this in one of my videos. I think it was last week or it was 2 weeks ago. I think it was last week. But that Golden Tate, he had started off last year running bad in the touchdown department, and by the second half of the year, it finally corrected itself. And, of course, as we saw last week, he did get a touchdown early on in the game, but then that second touchdown of his in the final seconds got taken away, which was controversial to say the least. And so Golden Tate would have had a monster game, obviously, otherwise than that. Golden Tate in double-digit targets last week, so that's 2 of the first 3 weeks. Golden Tate is... let's pull it up here really quickly here. Golden Tate, 12 targets week 1. He only had 4 in week 2, and his snaps were down a little bit for whatever reason. But week 3, back up to 11 targets, played at like 90% of snaps. So obviously Golden Tate's getting like as many snaps now as Marvin Jones, actually. It looks like are about the same, give or take a little bit. But Golden Tate, all in on him for that. If there's somebody else I'm looking to play here, maybe potentially, I'm just going to mention Adam Thielen. The reason for Thielen really is that, like, Sam Bradford's out, and I don't know how many people are going to jump off of, Thielen here in this spot because of that, and there are some other decent options, like you said, like Watkins and Hogan, and probably a lot of people will look there. But I actually don't think the drop-off from Bradford to Keenum really is that substantial, believe it or not. And Thielen, I think, looked pretty good last week, obviously, against Tampa. Should be pretty good spot here, so I think that's fine as well.
Yeah, I like Thielen as well. Darius, again, this is another shadow coverage situation with Darius Slay, which is not as scary, but Slay will have Diggs. I think this is a good matchup for Thielen. I like him quite a bit. We're going to go with Tate, though, since we both seem to be in agreement there. And now we're going to skip to Tier 6 and Tier 5 for quarterbacks. So we're going to skip to Tier 4 for now. And Nick, I'll just let you lead this off. We have 5 players. This is more of a high projected tier. Who do you like here?
For me, the number one guy is DeAndre Hopkins here. He is an absolute target monster. He's number one in the league right now in targets and how much he's getting used right now. I know he hasn't had like the monster game yet that some people are been coming to expect, but I think this is definitely the time where that could happen. The other guy I would also throw in here as well is Dalvin Cook, just because of how many carries he's getting per game right now. Obviously I probably wouldn't look to do Dalvin Cook with Thielen, potentially, obviously, but if we're doing that. But for this lineup, since we didn't put him in, I think Dalvin Cook would be great here as well.
Yeah, so I like everyone in this tier, and I agree with you about DeAndre Hopkins. He probably, actually, I'd probably have both the running backs here higher than Hopkins, but I do think that Bryant and Hopkins here, the wide receivers on DraftKings, I just think have more upside in general because it's PPR, because you have the 100-yard bonus, which Hopkins and Bryant both could reach easily. And that being said, Fournette and Cook could also have a 100-yard bonus rushing as well. But Hopkins and Bryant are the type of players who can have, 10-catch, 100-yard games. Bryant has been a monster in the red zone this season. So I think in this tier, I'd actually prefer going with Hopkins or Bryant. And I could go with either one. I agree with Nick about Hopkins, though. Seems like the best play, so let's just jam him in there. So next up, Tier 3. I'm very, very clear on this one. And I think I'm just going to be hopeful that his ownership is going to be down. And that's Todd Gurley for Tier 3. I think he's just simply the best player in this tier. He's been used a lot in the passing game for the Rams. I think he's actually leading the team in targets. The rushing production hasn't been that good. I think it'll probably improve, and even if it doesn't, I just think the catches are there. Also playing about 100% of snaps, 94% of snaps. Really, really like him, so he's my favorite in this tier.
Yeah, for me, the rushing production is probably a little bit more of a concern, just because the Rams are 27th in yards per carry, and they faced the Colts, the 49ers, and the Rams. Who did they play the other week? I don't remember actually off the top of my head.
The Redskins.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean the Washington football team. I'm sorry.
Yes, exactly. And so, I wouldn't call those exactly all any of those really stout rush defenses. But anyways,
it's pretty cake matchups for sure.
But the volume is insane for Todd Gurley, and the passing game will be there. So I don't deny that he has the upside. So I debate that. For me, is the one guy I would probably look here is for Christian McCaffrey, and I know a lot of people have been expecting quite a bit from McCaffrey, and it hasn't happened yet. But I will just say this, if you watch Christian McCaffrey when he was at Stanford, whether it's you played college DFS back in the day or whether you just watched him, you know how much of a home run threat he is anytime he gets his hands on the ball. And Christian McCaffrey, granted, he benefited a little bit because of Kelvin Benjamin being out for a good chunk of the game last week, and he'll be back this week. They still have Greg Olsen. I really haven't seen any wide receiver really that makes me believe that they're going to step up as a main threat. And so I just think McCaffrey's getting used so much in the passing game, and Carolina will probably be trailing pretty quickly and early in this game against New England, that I could see McCaffrey just getting a ton of dump offs and getting thrown to a bunch in the slot from Cam, and so or out of the backfield for that matter too as well. And so this is just one of those things where McCaffrey's upside is just so big. It's DraftKings PPR, the whole thing there, that I really like McCaffrey's upside, despite being a running back as a 9-point underdog. That's not ideal, but for this situation, I really like it.
I think this is the first place we disagree. I think people will use McCaffrey in this tier, and I just don't think he's as high projected as some of the other guys, except maybe Diggs. And with Diggs, actually, I think he won't be owned at all in this tier, but maybe it depends how fishy it is. But let's fire up Gurley, since we both agree there, or have some agreement at least.
Close enough.
Moving on to tier 2. I have a pretty straightforward answer. So this is a pretty simple one. There's only 3 choices. I think Ezekiel Elliott certainly will be the highest owned. McCoy, I think, will be the second. Le'Veon Bell is the third. I think for the purposes of a GPP, I think Le'Veon Bell is the clear pick here. The drop-off in projection between him and Elliott probably, in my opinion, is not very much, if at all. And Le'Veon Bell, best fantasy player in football last year, aside from David Johnson. He has had a slow start. Baltimore is a tough defense. He is on the road. But I think we certainly could see a huge game out of him in a divisional game, and he's extremely talented. Hopefully Pittsburgh gets Marcus Gilbert back. I think I just throw him in this tier as a GPP play.
Yeah, I can't argue it. I will say this just because I've watched the Steelers particularly closely. The only thing that really worries me is just that the Steelers' offensive line, with part of it, they lost Gilbert, but they had lost, or I think it was Villanueva, or maybe it was one of the other linemen, had an illness and lost 15 pounds a couple weeks ago, and is now working to get the weight back. And so the offensive line just really hasn't been gelling so far. I thought the first week against the Browns, maybe it was just it's a 1 week thing and type of a thing, but it's a little concerning to me. But at the same time, Le'Veon's getting every single snap possible. And actually, the one thing that's really interesting about this is, Pittsburgh's playing at Baltimore. This is usually a pretty hardcore defensive game and everything. The one thing I found pretty interesting here, Baltimore so far, they played 3 games. They played Jacksonville and London. They played the Browns at home, and then they played at the Bengals as well. Yeah. Ravens right now 21st in yards per rush attempt allowed, and the Bengals have not been able to run the ball very well at all. The Browns have been okay running it, I believe. They've just been kind of average.
I think they've been pretty disappointing, actually. Isaiah Crowell has been very disappointing.
Yeah, and Fournette's getting fantasy points, but a lot of that more has actually been his touchdowns. In terms of the yards per carry from him, has not been very good. So anyways, I actually think that Baltimore's run defense actually is not really that great actually this year, at least so far. And so this actually could be a nice spot for Le'Veon to really take off. I will just say, though, I completely agree about Elliott. His ownership's going to be very high. I think you probably think McCoy's ownership will be kind of close to Elliott's. I probably think they're probably going to be a little bit farther apart, but I think McCoy is an okay option too, just because McCoy gets used in the passing game so much with Buffalo, even if Buffalo's losing early on in the game. McCoy actually leads the team in targets right now, which is a positive thing. So I think Le'Veon, we put Le'Veon in the lineup, certainly, since we both agree there.
We have 3 choices. They all seem like good options. Damn. I guess we'll just put in Bell.
Yeah.
Last one that's not a quarterback tier. We have the stud wide receivers, Antonio Brown, A.J. Green, and Julio Jones. Nick, who's your pick?
I really don't think there's a terrible option here, but I'll just say I think Antonio Brown. You give me if salary does not matter, I'm going to pretty much take Antonio Brown nearly every single time. Right now, just because of the wide receiver situation of this Pittsburgh, what's his face? Martavius Bryant. He has missed practice now 2 days in a row now with an illness. I think he'll probably play, but either way, He still, like, from a consistency standpoint, hasn't still been like as great as some people have been expecting. They're beat up at the tight end position. Jesse James has been banged up and everything like that. And so Antonio's going to get a ton of targets, and I think it's perfectly fine to go with him just straight away.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he's the most talented. He has the talent to just soak up as many targets as they want to give him. And I think he's the highest projected player here. I'd say Green is probably my least highest projected. I just don't think he did have a monster game last week, but I just don't think he's on the same level as Julio Jones and Antonio Brown, despite having a good matchup. And I wonder what his ownership is going to be compared to these two. So I'm going to fire up Brown as well. And now we're going to get to the quarterback. So this actually is not going to be as much of a debate as just look at who we played and see who to pair with. And what stands out to me is we have Marcus Mariota and Ben Roethlisberger here on this tier. And we have Roethlisberger with both Bell and Brown, or Mariota with Delaney Walker. I think we go either way. I think it's smarter, since these two are such studs, that if they're both going to have a huge game, Roethlisberger is probably going to have a huge game as well. So I think we should put Roethlisberger in here. Also, I think there's some 2-point conversion equity. And then we have for this tier, it looks like there's no players aside from really Deshaun Watson that we're actually using in this tier. There's no skill position players from the quarterback's team. So I think it would be smart to fire up Watson here. I am a little concerned that a lot of people will go Hopkins here and then fire Watson. So that actually makes me think it might be a smart idea to pivot away from Hopkins if this is the case. But that being said, I'm not that experienced with Pick'em yet to really make that bold of a call. So we could stick Watson there. I think naked Tyrod Taylor as well. Rushing fantasy points can be really big here, and you might not actually have to pass to anyone. You can just run it in for a touchdown. So I think we could go either way. I'll just stick in Tyrod Taylor. And if you have any other thoughts, Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, when you mentioned Tyrod Taylor there, for me also, just because you obviously mentioned the rushing touchdowns, Deshaun Kaiser, he already has, he's running it a bunch actually already this year in the red zone and inside the 5 as well. And honestly, I'll just say for those, I doubt many people, I mean, unless you're like a Browns fan or a Colts fan, like watch that Browns-Colts game. Kenny Britt dropped a bajillion passes in that game, and Kaiser's numbers should be, I mean, he's still off of the mark a little bit here and there, and he's thrown like a bad interception, but like really, like I think Kaiser's numbers should be better than what they are, and his rushing upside is there. So that I think the naked Deshaun Kaiser, just not pairing him with the receiver is perfectly fine as well. But yeah, no complaints about Tyrod or Deshaun pairing, obviously, as well. That seems good.
Yeah, and one final thought is, I think probably 0 people will use Joe Flacco on the spot. I think, and there's no one to pair him with, so I think all the smart people will sort of just not use him. I think it's possible that you might want to throw him in here in Pick'em, just because he could have a good game. It's not totally out of the question, and if he does beat the projection of all these guys, that is a little bit of an edge. So I think you could throw Flacco in there and keep it in mind.
It's true, and it's kind of funny. Like when I first was thinking about Flacco, it's like I don't care if he's like 0.1% owned. Like what's the point? But the truth, but the truth of the matter is though, like for this spot though, you look at who Flacco is going up against. Like if Flacco even has like, I mean, it's not that out of the question to say like even if he only throws for like let's say 200 yards or 225 yards, but if he throws for 3 touchdowns and he ends up getting like a 20-point fantasy week or something, that could easily be better than the other guys. Like that's not that like far out of the question. And if he's not going to be owned at all, that's really not a bad idea.
Yeah. I'm actually warming up to it more and more as I think about it. One more note just with Flacco. I actually don't mind in just regular fantasy Macklin-Flacco combo this week. Macklin's really priced down, and I think he's a pretty good wide receiver. Just a little GPP play for normal tournaments. But so that's it. We have our Pick'em lineup. It's ready to enter, and I think this was a little fun exercise on just sort of ranking players using the Pick'em tier. And thank you guys for joining us. Hope you enjoyed this. You can tweet me at Max Steinberg if you have any questions. You can tweet Nick at Nick Juskevich or Juskevich, however you want to pronounce it.
And you can also find it's fine. I've heard them all.
Yes, and you can also find us on the Daily Fantasy Winners forums. We'll be posting more about NFL strategy this week. So yeah, have good luck. Good luck with your pick'em lineups. Good luck with your regular lineups, and have a good weekend.
Good luck, guys. Get healthy, Ty Montgomery.